I guess setting the context for this, and we're going to be diving into sort of the role of general counsels and sort of thinking about the legal dimensions. But I think it's important to sort of set the wider context. And I think, firstly, it's, we're talking about the SDGs. We're on 2025. The goals were set until 2030. We know that we're broadly off track across pretty much everything. And also that climate change itself undermines progress on a whole host of them. What we also know is that the US has just withdrawn from the SDGs. So meeting these is ever harder. The goals themselves and the issues that they are founded on are all the more urgent. So kind of in this interesting tension and interesting challenge point. And I guess when I was reflecting on this particular topic, I was thinking about the need for almost this integrated action, sort of every part of an organization, every part of society, having to almost find their pathway towards continuing to try and to make progress on these actions. And I'm absolutely not from a legal background, so kind of thinking about the role of general counsel, I'm going to be learning as much as all of you, but really seeing the role of general counsel as this strategic support, this guidance on decision making, and setting that value in the context of these really quite urgent challenges. And there can sometimes be a tension. There's an urgency, but how do you do it well? And so I think that's kind of what we're going to be zoning in on. So I wonder if you just sort of introduce yourselves and what the scope of your role is in your organisation. So maybe just describe the role of general counsel first before we sort of dive into then some of the discussion.
Should I start? Yeah, so I'm Christy Baker. I'm the GC at First Group, which is a public transport company here in the UK, listed entity. I have all the normal duties of a general counsel in terms of legal. There is that sort of that nebulous, that I am the guardian of the company's conscience aspect to the role, and I have been carving out, I suppose, a bit of a role for myself in the sustainability space. It's not formally part of my job description, but I think it does neatly fall actually into both those areas, that sort of ethical conscience bit of what I do, but also obviously the legal and compliance bit of what I do. I'm fortunate to work at a company that is part of, nowadays seen as part of the solution. I was saying to Mary earlier, not that long ago, we were seen as part of the problem because we were just a big polluter. Now people have realised that actually getting people out of cars and onto buses and trains is a big win. So we are committed to the sustainability goals, particularly around environmental sustainability. But it's a challenge, definitely.
Great. Thank you, Christy. Mary.
Thanks, Hannah. So my name is Mary Foley, and I'm going to caveat it by saying I'm not a lawyer. I don't have a legal background. I work for a company called Inhisa. I'm the Expert Services Strategy Director. And what we do is we work with multinational companies, just helping them understand the regulatory obligations in each of the jurisdictions that they operate in, from an environmental, health, safety, and ESG product and sustainable chemistry. So we cover that spectrum, and what we're finding more and more is that typically we would have worked with the EHS department, or maybe even the sustainability department. It's more and more now the general counsel. Mm-hmm. And we were just saying that we're seeing general counsel, you're there as the guardian, but you're also there to help with understanding the risks to business. You're there from, the risks of non-compliance, the risks of maybe making sure that your stakeholders, from your investors all the way through to your users or consumers, that you're bringing them with you. I think when we were speaking, Hannah, we were talking about it's all about collaboration. It's about the internal collaboration. It's the collaboration with your sectors, and it's the collaboration through your supply chains. Yeah. So, and I was saying to somebody earlier, let's count how many times we talk about collaboration in this next 15, 20 minutes. But that's the key.
Yeah.
That's the key.
Yeah. Great, thank you. I realised I forgot to introduce myself as well at the beginning. So I'm Hannah Partick, I'm the CEO at Forum for the Future, and we're an NGO. We work on sustainability issues, particularly in food, energy and purpose of business, but we also work using a lot of systems thinking approaches. So I was particularly interested in this because of sort of almost what are all the mechanisms, what are all the vehicles of which law and legal counsel is one of those that we can kind of almost bring to bear. We need everything that we can bring to bear to be tackling some of these challenges. And I know virtually every conversation I have at the moment seems to start with the geopolitical chat, as I'm sure is the same for everyone. But just thinking from the general counsel perspective, like how do you navigate this volatile, fast-moving context that your organisation is in, and how do you go about that in a way that you can then continue to provide that guidance, those sort of strategic parameters? Maybe Christy.
Yeah, no, certainly. I think we're lucky at my company in that we are almost entirely a UK focused company. We have small business in Ireland. So in terms of keeping abreast of the regulatory development side of it is relatively simple, and it's still only relative. Even one jurisdiction or two actually is hard enough. But that geopolitical thing is definitely an issue, and I think. Again, we're not currently directly impacted by what's happening across the Atlantic in terms of political policy, but we are impacted by the economic impact. And for us, we have been able to sort of really accelerate our transition to zero emission at the tailpipe, as I keep on reminding our comms teams from a greenwashing perspective, but our buses are increasingly zero emissions at the tailpipe. But that has been led by government funding. Now it's a collaboration again, but between us and government, and we put in at least as much as government does. But that funding will inevitably dry up because there just isn't enough money to go round right now. And so I think that's probably our biggest single challenge is we remain committed corporately. We have science-based targets. We have a number of goals that we have, as I say, publicly committed to, but it's finding the cash to do that because these things aren't cheap. And I think there's certainly a point around network infrastructure, so charging for us, but grid, generation, whatever it might be, as to whether there are better ways of collaborating with either competitors or up and down the supply chain to make sure that the money is going where you get the most bang for your buck, frankly, that perhaps we shouldn't be competing for the funds in quite the same way that we have historically. Rather, it's making sure that the funds are being channeled, as I say, where they have the most impact.
Mary, I wondered if you wanted to build on that. Again, I suspect you'll say collaboration, but it's almost how do you shift the perspectives so that trying to access that investment is done on a sort of systemic, building a new system, literally a new infrastructure, but also a systemic way of thinking around it. And how do you support in that role of sort of shifting that thinking?
So I think you mentioned the word incremental. For so many years, for so many decades, it has been, slightly better, do it better. But just the last 3-4 months, in the sustainability world has seen, you mentioned it yourself, it's fast moving, it's evolving pretty much on a daily basis. And what we're seeing is, where we had spent a lot of time looking at things, from a reporting point of view, which drives a lot of companies with that, moving from incremental to step change. So in Europe, we have, the CSRD, which from a reporting point of view, double materiality, lots of stakeholder engagement, that was going to help move everything, exponentially. Yeah. Because, the old saying, what gets measured gets done. Yeah. Now you can have the conversation, is the tail wagging the dog? Doesn't really matter as long as that change starts to happen. And now we've seen that, alongside the, the CSDDD, the supply chain. Yep. We've seen this, omnibus approach now. On one side, is that complete deregulation? On another side, is it a simplification? And how does that fit with the geopolitical scenario that we're all facing at the moment? And I think the most important thing is to make sure you're getting your information from credible sources,
Yeah.
that you understand the implications of any of those changes and the potential impacts to your business, to your customers and to your supply chains. And then it's back to impact, risk and opportunities.
And Christy, you mentioned the word greenwashing.
I did.
We were emailing around one another before this. We were sort of that spectrum of greenwashing to green hushing, and both are risky.
Yeah.
And I can imagine, maybe I'm wrong, but I imagine like legal counsel is probably more wary of greenwashing than green hushing, because better to like be confident of what you do say, but hold back on the things where you're less so. But that's also risky, particularly in the current climate where we need evidence of progress almost to kind of continue to spar and galvanize hope. So perhaps you could speak about that spectrum of risk.
Yeah, and I think they are different risks. I mean, clearly the greenwashing risk is a more sort of pure legal regulatory risk. Depending which is your regulator, but there are plenty of regulators out there who are beginning to take action. The green hushing one for me it's a different risk, but it is probably equally as worrisome because particularly, I mean, and this perhaps more a personal view than a GC view, but in the current political climate, we need people demonstrating leadership, and how do you do that? By shouting to the mountains, kind of thing, of what you are doing and doing it well. So. Different risks, but in some ways of equal concern.
And are you able to, either of you, to sort of bring to life any dialogues that you've had that's maybe on one or the other ends of the spectrum, just to kind of ground it in examples of the kinds of greenwash claims that were risky, but people are sort of dialing back on that, but equally where perhaps people are rolling back on their DEI targets, for example, as we're seeing quite a lot, particularly in the US, where that's also creating risk. And maybe this is more of a question for you, Mary, sort of working across a broader jurisdiction.
I think from the greenwashing point of view, as Christy rightly pointed out, there is a regulatory element to that. But what is interesting is that the regulator is the competition authority in a lot of countries. Here in the UK,
yes,
in Australia, it was in the US, where the SEC had its own ESG task force, and that task force were going after companies. And it's probably wiped from the website now, but it actually was talking about fines in terms of, tens of millions of dollars for companies, well-known companies, that had overstated their environmental or their sustainable credentials, had been selling products or services underneath a greener or better banner, and the same in the UK.
Yeah.
And both, Australia and the UK now have green codes or green claim codes, and especially in the UK, it's built on a sector-by-sector approach. So this is important, to make sure that consumers understand that the products they buy or the services they buy, if they come with green, environmental or sustainable credentials, that there is something to back it up
behind it. Yeah, well, I think this points to this question here, and please do add questions as well. You can use the QR code. So a recent survey found only 40% of companies had put in place measurable SDG commitments, and just 20% including evidence to assess impacts. How do we change this? So upping the numbers on both counts, commitment and evidence.
So I mean, how do we change this? I think it has to come partly from within. So and it has to come from board level. This is one of these things that actually it really, really is about tone from the top. That it doesn't matter how much the people below that board level want to do something. If the board isn't committed, then it's never going to quite happen. And that comes down to, frankly, CapEx on a lot of these things, but also meaningful change in terms of culture as well. So I think that the board plays a really, really important role here. I think there's an external point to it as well, which is around government and regulation and carrot and stick, and what government can do to encourage companies, as I say, whether that's through carrot and stick, carrot or stick rather, to really commit to these things. And then, sorry, third point, also external stakeholders. So again, whether that's owners, investors, etc., they have a really, really important role to play.
And I think, John Kerry mentioned it this morning, that don't look to government for regulation. And we're seeing more and more self-regulation, I think. And the market will regulate itself, whether it's from a consumer point of view, an investor point of view, but all of those stakeholders can drive that change and up those numbers.
Yeah, great. I know you were particularly interested in this sort of pre-competitive space, and this is where we perhaps dive into and this was it came up in the last panel I was on as well, as a lot of these sustainability challenges can only be solved systemically, and that then pushes organisations into that pre-competitive space, but a lot of them are nervous about doing so because of anti-competition law, but also because it requires building relationships and sort of going beyond their typical boundaries. And I wonder if you could bring to life examples of where you're seeing it working, almost to give that sense of confidence.
I think where we see it working, with our clients, is really through their sector associations. So especially in the manufacturing sector, you see the sector associations coming together to set baselines. And I'm bringing it back to compliance again. Compliance is the ultimate baseline.
Yeah.
What companies do above that takes them to the next level, and what you do at your sector level. And I think sector associations we see are playing a huge part in that.
And then going beyond that baseline.
Exactly. Exactly.
I think we are pretty much at time, which we did forecast that this would feel very, very quick. I just wonder if either of you had anything that you kind of just want to make sure is said in this general topic.
I think that everyone clearly has a role to play in this. I think GCs have a particular role. I think that we tend to have that holistic oversight of these issues and the risks and the rewards, and can really drive that change, because often we'll have the ear of the board, the ear of the CEO, and that trusted advisor status. So I think it can be a real agent for change, this role.
Yeah, great.
And I think for me, it's more about, there is a lot of noise out there. Focus on what's important to your business, to your stakeholders, and to that wider ecosystem.
Yeah. And I think we are starting to see indicators that perhaps we'll start to come out of this sort of morass of chaos, and businesses that will sort of stay true to their values, and they can stay the course, whether it's, being a little bit quieter about it, but just cracking on anyway, and finding their peers who are also cracking on to sort of give confidence. So great. Thank you, everyone, for joining. And thank you. I'll just give you a quick round of applause. Thank you very much for the fireside chat. Thank you.
Lovely. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, Christy.